So today we're welcoming Daphne Lambert, the founding member of Greencuisine Trust, which is a charity which works to improve the understanding of the relationship between food, cooking, culture, biodiversity, agriculture, and the environment. Now, Daphne has been a chef for over 4 decades. She's been an eco-nutritionist for more than 25 years, and she's eaten a diet that's rich in plants and free from animal products for 30 years. And she was an owner and chef at the first restaurant to be certified organic by the Soil Association. And we haven't even mentioned your gardening, have we? So, Daphne, welcome to The Nutshell.
Hello, thank you for inviting me. And no, you haven't mentioned my garden, which is in my view at the moment and just coming alive.
Oh, yes. Yeah, no, it's lovely, isn't it? Yeah, we are recording in spring now. So we'd love to hear more details on how you became so interested in farming and why you chose to eat a diet free from animal products all those years ago.
Well, I left London in the 1970s to become the chef and co-owner of a restaurant nestled in the countryside between Powys and Herefordshire. The counties of Herefordshire, Shropshire and Powys are home to one of the densest concentrations of industrially farmed chicken in Europe. And mostly, of course, these are out of sight. Yet this area, especially I found in Wales, is home also to some amazing organic growers. And visiting them to collect the fruit and the vegetables for the restaurant was pure joy. The horror, however, of one day stepping into an industrial chicken shed will be a scar on my memory forever. Deciding to eat a plant-based diet was a knee-jerk reaction to my visit to an industrial chicken shed.
How did you come to go to an industrial chicken shed?
Because I opened the door to look in. I mean, there are farmers all around me that had the sheds, but they're all hidden. But I've always been a dog walker, and my dog took me there, and it probably for a purpose.
Right. Okay. So that was that you got the message then.
I opened the door and looked in. And how many people have done that? I mean, it's staggering. 55,000 chickens. But anyway, that was the turning point for me. But I would like to be clear, it was a reaction to worst case scenario, and including animals in farming that promotes best practice and limits harm, like organic, I think has a place. But to this day, my choice has remained to not eat foods of animal origin. I qualified as a nutritionist in the 80s, but was taught nothing about farming and the connection between healthy soil, healthy plants, healthy people. So I learned from farmers and growers. And my teaching for the last 30 years connects people back to the soil. And soil is the foundation of our health. So just as a nutritionist, you might hone in on nutrients, but I'm much, much broader. And if one says this particular food is good for you, I think, well, what are the consequences to the environment of that food? If it's not good for the environment, it can't be good for you. So it's that whole interconnected system that's important to me.
Slightly tricky question, I think, for us, because at plant-based health professionals, we're all about eating a whole food diet and avoiding animal products. Whilst we recognise the benefits of organic food, perhaps we don't push that as much because we're also realistic about affordability, and we'd like as many people to have access to a plant-based diet as possible without sort of imposing ideas about necessity of organic food. So really, I wanted to know more about why organic was so important to you.
I think there's 3 key areas which are important to me, which is organic, local and fair trade. And, it's often quite hard to get all 3, but I'll talk first about organic. So organic farming is a form of agroecological farming which works in harmony with nature, uses no artificial pesticides, which are chemicals known to impact human health with links to cancer, respiratory and neurological disease. Almost 300 synthetic pesticides can be used on non-organic farms. Organic farmers are permitted to use just 15 pesticides, all derived from natural ingredients such as garlic and clove oil, and only used in very restricted circumstances. In addition, no synthetic fertilizers are used, and synthetic nitrogen fertilizers are responsible for an increase in nitrous oxide in the atmosphere, and that is a greenhouse gas 300 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So it's estimated that 95% of our food is directly or indirectly produced from our soils. And natural farming practices like biodynamic and organic constantly rebuild soil health through organic matter. This vital living soil grows nutritious, healthy food free from chemicals while sustaining nature and sequestering carbon. So it does a number of things which I think are really, really important. And there's a huge amount of research. And the research I really like is from David Montgomery from the University of Washington. And he compares the effect of different methods of farming on soil health and crop nutrient density. And what he did, he got different cohorts throughout the United States and ran different trials. And his comparison indicates that regenerative style farming practices, employing no-till or cover crops and diverse crop rotations, are the ones most likely to produce high levels of vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients. So those are the reasons that I would support organic. There's also local. Local, I think, is also incredibly important. I mean, you might have a farmer's market and you might be able to get local and organic. But what happens if you have to choose between local or organic? Well, I think it's incredibly important to support your local community. And that is what local does, because it keeps the money in your local economy rather than handing over money to a large corporation somewhere. The other thing that's so important to me about local food, it has a shorter time between harvest and the table. So it is less likely that we have lost the nutrients in that plant. So studies show that vegetables can lose up to 55% of their vitamin C within a week of harvest. But certain greens, like, for example, spinach, will have lost 90% of their vitamin C within 48 hours. The idea that the farmer has harvested the produce, gone down the market, and you've taken it home and cooked it all in one day, you've got the maximum amount of nutrition. Something that's been harvested a week earlier and transported to be hanging in a plastic bag in your shop is not going to have the same sort of nutrition. That's really why I think local is really important. And what do you decide to do? Do you have local or do you have organic? I think I would go for local, because actually you can talk to the farmer. How did you grow it? When did you harvest it? Why have you chosen that crop? And that's an exchange. That's a community experience. But I also think it's unrealistic to think that we can have everything local. So many of our really loved things like, I don't know, cocoa, bananas, coffee, tea, unfortunately sugar, all those sort of ingredients, I think should be sourced fair trade. And whilst there is a sort of interplay between organic and fair trade, sort of similar social, economic and environmental standards, in certain circumstances, you should look after people as well as animals. We should be choosing fair trade. And I do think it's really difficult what you're saying around cost, but food may look cheap. Cheap food comes at a cost to animals, humans and the environment.
If you're there facing these choices and you sort of think, I have got some money that I'm prepared to up my food bill by.
Yeah.
If you're thinking about organic, where would you put that money? Are there certain products that you would always say you should buy these organic, or does it matter? I think there's something, Daisy, we were talking before and you mentioned something called the dirty dozen.
I think it does make a difference. I think that's a really good question, because PAN, which is the Pesticide Action Network, bring out a dirty dozen every year. And that is based on government research. And their dirty dozen always has at the top of it citrus fruits. There's an awful lot of chemicals used on post-harvest, and citrus fruit have a lot of fungicides added to them after harvesting. But of the samples that were tested, 96% of tangerines, for example, had multiple residues of pesticides. Now, you might say, well, we don't eat tangerine peel, but actually many of these chemicals are systemic. So citrus always comes out bad, tangerines, oranges, lemons, but the next one that is a real problem, non-organic, is grapes. So 87% of those tested had multiple residues of pesticides. So it's not just one pesticide. It's, it's that cocktail effect of which we don't really know the true consequence of a cocktail effect. And then I think the other one that's really high up is pears. If you're choosing to have some fruit, I would get organic grapes and pears. Actually, in America, they have a clean list as well. But in this country, we don't do the clean list. And I think it's because at PAN, they decided that it's just too hard to truly recommend ones that haven't had any chemicals on them. But I know there are some that would be easy to grow without the use of chemicals. And, some of the day-to-day foods of onion and cabbage are very unlikely to have had multiple residues of pesticides. And asparagus, which is coming into season now, if it comes from this country, it's very unlikely to have pesticides. And mushrooms. So those are the ones that I would say were easier.
That's really useful to know, because I think, as Claire says, if someone's deciding from a financial point of view what they can buy non-organic and what they can buy organic, it's just really useful to have a look at those lists. And we'll put a link in the show notes as well, maybe, to that Dirty Dozen list. So you've definitely inspired me to head down to my farmers markets again, I think, on a weekend morning. But can I ask a little bit about seasonal vegetables? We hear a lot about buy in season, and are there any additional benefits other than the fact that they haven't travelled, across the world or been in storage somewhere, I suppose? What are the benefits, and why should we buy seasonal?
So we've evolved over millennia to eat in the rhythm of the seasons. And I think because we globally seek foods that are out of season in our own environment, we have forgotten we are nature. And building a diet around seasonal food actually supports the body's natural seasonal variations. So, I love the way different foods become available as we move through the year. So at this time of year, those lovely green shoots are beginning to spring forth, sorrel, wild garlic, rocklet, nettles, and soon to be asparagus. And they are all foods that naturally cleanse the body of the winter foods. And then you come into the summer and you've got those bedazzling colours of the summer foods. And I think they're there to reinforce our more creative and expansive mood. And then in the autumn, you get foods like pumpkin, blackberries, rose hips, apples and pears. They support us as we prepare for the winter foods, which are those root flavours of beetroot and celeriac and parsnip and potatoes and turnips. And they're there to actually nourish us deeply as we go through this reflective period. And I know, some people will say, well, this is a bit of a romantic notion, but I really believe, and if you look at other systems of like Ayurvedic or traditional Chinese medicine, they all talk about eating in the rhythm of the seasons. But actually, there is actually science that supports this. There's the Zen hormesis theory, which proposes that plants contains substances that provide our bodies with information about the environment conditions in which those plants were grown. And these signals are important for us to adapt to various seasons of the year. So their outcome of their research around this is that we should eat plants in season so that the rhythms of our lives are synchronized with the environment, which is what so many people have said for, as I say, for millennia.
I love that. It's making me question the strawberries that I think I might have in the fridge that's obviously not in season at all.
I think it's a double whammy. I think it's because it's the assumption they've got the nutrients in, which I think is misleading. And it's also the fact that it's just edging us away from the rhythm our body wants to follow. And I think the key thing is we have forgotten we are nature. We have put ourselves above nature.
So what do you think are the worst products to buy out of season?
I would definitely not buy asparagus. Asparagus from South America and South Africa is just totally unnecessary when we have the most amazing asparagus in the Vale of Evesham and locally, wherever you are, some is grown. I think you should eat it in season, and it is a food that is a spring food. I don't think you need asparagus in November, but there's other ones as well. Why do we get blackberries from Guatemala? I can't think of anything more ridiculous. Blackberries are the food of the autumn. So I think anything that has come from such a long way away in the wrong season isn't good for us. But, there are certain foods like sweet corn and peas, because they lose their vitamin C so quickly, they're frozen instantly. And I think they're good products to use out of season. Frozen peas and frozen sweet corn.
Yeah, I've heard of people harvesting their own berries in the autumn and then freezing those to have throughout the winter.
I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. And what about growing our own fruits and vegetables? And I always get stuck there. I must say, I'm a city living person. Yes, I have maybe a bit of outdoor space, but I probably don't use it very well. Where do I even start with growing fruit and veg?
I think there's a lot of opportunity to link in with urban farms and community growers and community supported agriculture and allotments, and learn from those people how to grow food. Sustain's Good to Grow network is amazing, and it links nationally people to become volunteers in different growing systems. So that's the groundwork of learning how to do it yourself. But actually, it's very easy to start growing. And if you don't want to do it in the garden, you can do it in pots. And if you don't want to do it in pots because you haven't got a garden or even a back doorstep that you could use, you could grow it on windowsills. There's lots of ways to easily start growing. And there's lots of people that will share information with you. Allotment growers, I love talking about growing vegetables.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a good place to start. But Claire's asked me to ask you a very complicated question, which I don't understand, about crop rotations and soil quality. Do we need to be thinking about that as a home? Growing your own
if
fruit?
you're going to grow a lot of vegetables, crop rotation is important. And it's about growing specific groups of vegetables on different parts of the vegetable plot each year, and that limits soil deficiencies and helps control pests and diseases. So if you go for a 3-year rotation, for example, you'd go legumes, followed by brassica, followed by root crops. And I'll tell you a really good person to check out is Charles Dowding. He's actually the pioneer of the no-dig system. He's absolutely fantastic. I think it's just charlesdowding.co.uk. But he also has done lots of research on rotation and why some rotations work, and actually some things don't need rotating as much as we believe. He's worth checking out.
Okay, great. That's a great tip. I've only ever tried to grow lettuce leaves, and they always get eaten, not eaten by us, by the way, eaten by whatever visitors I've got in the garden.
Yes.
So I think that's really what's put me off, actually. I didn't go back after that. And I don't obviously want to use anything that's harmful to the environment and to the creatures in the garden. Any tips on that for a new home grower?
Over the last few years, a lot of people have turned to gardening. Yes, there were some very disillusioned people with their garden visitors. So I've tried most things, actually. Sometimes I put down little beer traps for them, but that will kill them, but it won't harm any other visiting animals. Sometimes I surround them with a sort of gravel or a texture that they can't climb over. One of the greatest things was to encourage the right animals into your garden so that they had natural predators. That's really how it works, but that's not always very easy for people. And I really take on board how depressing it can be when all your food is eaten by slugs and snails. I have also gone out at night with a torch and collected them and taken them somewhere else.
The old neighbour's garden trick.
Well, I wasn't going to tell you where I was going to be doing them. But I mean, they can go somewhere else. They don't need to only munch my garden.
Exactly, where they'll be well fed. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, assuming we get our heads around the no-dig method and we rotate our crops properly and we have a really good year and we get a real bounty of crop, too much to eat fresh. We mentioned the blackberries, and Daisy said, people have told me about that. I've told you about that, Daisy, because I do I do it every year. We have a fantastic bounty on the Isle of Wight, and my freezer is still going until about January, but then it runs out. But there are other things we can do. So can you talk us through what else we might be able to do to keep our food supplies going?
Well, there's two methods that I use to preserve food the most are drying and fermenting. Drying, you can either improvise with an oven. So some foods can be dried after you've been cooking in the residue of the heat. You could also buy a dehydrator. I have built, well, actually, that's a complete lie. My son built for me a solar dehydrator, which would be a fabulous community project, so that it belonged to the community and people could use it at different times to dry different fruits as they came in season in their garden. Certain leaves and certainly herbs can be dried on a rack or hung up in a light, airy place to dry. So there's lots of different ways that you could dry something. I dry an awful lot of herbs, but I also had a glut of beetroot. I dried and I pulverized and use it as a sweetener for biscuits and cakes. So it's a beetroot powder, very easy to do. But also beetroot makes a great fermented beetroot relish. So there's lots of ways you can do something around beetroot. All the leaves can be fermented, then they'll stay unopened until the next year. They'll last a year in a cool, dry place. Yes, it's getting to understand easy techniques to dry and preserve, easy techniques to ferment.
So you mentioned the solar dehydrator. Is that something that's powered by solar energy, or is it actually sort of concentrating the sun's rays onto things?
It concentrates the sun's rays.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
Right.
And there's on the internet, there's loads of different ones you can make. But I just feel that's a beautiful community project.
Yeah, it certainly sounds it, doesn't it? So I don't necessarily need a dehydrator, you're saying, because we can just hang stuff up or we can use an oven. But you mentioned fermenting. When you're fermenting stuff, do you lose nutrients by doing that?
Interesting. Actually, in a sense, the process of fermenting is breaking. Why I love it is very good that it makes quite indigestible foods more digestible, the process of fermenting. So actually fermented pulses, for example, are for many people much easier to digest than unfermented. But to go back to the leaves, what happens as you ferment, you break down carbohydrates and proteins, and so you release the minerals and vitamins that are bound to those carbohydrates and proteins. So actually, you are making the nutrients more bioavailable. You don't increase the nutrition, you just make it more bioavailable, and you certainly don't lose it.
Some people, they've tried to make kimchi or sauerkraut and they've ended up with a horrible smelly mess. Have you got any tips on how to avoid that?
When she says some people, Daphne.
Well, it's kind of, I mean, the flavors of kimchi are always chili, garlic, and ginger. So they are quite a strong smell when you make kimchi anyway. I think it's understanding the importance of just creating the right environment to enable the proliferation of the beneficial bacteria that will start creating the lactic acid, which is what preserves your material. And sometimes they can be a little bit stronger smell, but generally I don't find them that strong.
I was thinking more about if you get the wrong bacteria in something. Is it about how sterile your process was, but at the same time you need to be getting bacteria onto things, don't you?
When you ferment vegetables, you use salt. And actually, the lactic-loving bacteria are tolerant to salt, but the pathogenic ones aren't. So actually, if you create the right environment, you will engage the right bacteria. So it's very, very difficult to do a salt-free ferment, especially at the beginning, because that's what you're doing. You're creating the right environment for the right bacteria. To be quite honest, I don't go into all the sterilisation for fermenting. The lactic bacteria are everywhere. They're on the vegetables, they're in the air, they're on our clothes, they're on us. And you just create that right environment for them to proliferate.
Right. Okay. Got it. I'll have another go.
But the other thing, I tell you, there is another thing. When you make something like a sauerkraut, you've used salt to break down the cells and extract the juice. And that liquid is the liquid you ferment your material under. But what is absolutely important is that the leaves that you're fermenting stay under the liquid at any time. You don't want them above the liquid where they will attract molds and the wrong bacteria. So you've got to keep them submerged the whole time.
Okay. Wanted to ask you quite a specific question. Now, if you've ever listened to something like the Zoe podcast, you'll hear Tim Spector talking about the wonders of kefir. But obviously not eating animal products, I have trouble finding a plant-based one sometimes. It does pop up occasionally in the supermarket, but not very regularly. And what I wondered was, is there an easy way of making your own kefir from, I don't know, from soya milk, from coconut milk? How would I go about finding out how to do that?
I would actually question why make a plant milk kefir at all. I mean, traditionally, it's mammalian milk, and the kefir was made combining the mammalian milk with the kefir grains inside a goatskin bag. And it was the synergy between those three that made kefir. And it was made for thousands of years in the Caucasian mountains. And it was a technique used because they didn't have refrigeration. So it was the only way they could preserve milk. And kefir didn't really arrive in the West before the 1960s. I'm not sure why we want to adopt this method that was used on plant milks. I'm not even sure what the benefits would be in terms of the amount of microorganisms in a plant-based one versus a cow's or mammalian milk one. I haven't seen any research on that, but I've never done it. But I do water kefir. So you can buy water kefir grains, and then you can ferment a mixture of water and sugar. 80% of the sugar will be fermented out within 48 hours. And if you do it at the same time as putting in herbs, all the beneficial compounds of the herbs will go into the drink. And so you have a herbal, and you can put fruit in as well, and fruit kefir, but made from water grains instead of the milk grains.
Okay, that sounds like a good alternative, because I don't think we're going to be promoting the mammalian milk.
No,
one.
absolutely not. Yeah. I see no point. If you don't eat dairy products, I just see you should forget about milk kefir altogether and concentrate on water kefir. And I also do quite a lot around wild fermentation. So maybe I make a ginger soda or a turmeric soda and just invite the right bacteria to come into my my ferment, which is how we used to make a ginger bug for ginger beer.
Right. And this is something different to kombucha.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Both of those are completely different from kombucha.
Wow, Daphne, you're very knowledgeable, I must say. We could have so many questions. I don't know where to start.
Water kefir is fun, and I love playing around with herbs, and the idea that maybe you do one with thyme and that or rosemary, and then you've got something that's going to be really good for you if you've got a cold. Do you know what I mean? It's lovely being able to play around with the abundance of plants that just sort of grow around you.
That does sound great. I mean, moving away though from fermentation and fermenting foods, could I ask you specifically about sprouting? Because it's something that we have talked about on the podcast before. We know it can increase the nutrient density, I suppose, of certain seeds and foods and legumes. But how does one go about starting if we haven't done this before?
It's very simple. You can just do it with a jar with a piece of net over the top, or you can buy special equipment. I tend to steer away from bought equipment and try and improvise. You can sprout any seed. I would not do the deadly nightshade family though. So that's, tomato and aubergine. Wouldn't sprout those. And I wouldn't sprout red kidney beans. But anything else can be sprouted. So all you need to do is third fill your jar with beans or your chosen seed. and cover with water, and make sure that it's water which hasn't got any chlorine in it. If you're in an area that has very high chlorinated water, just run a bowl of water the night before and leave it to evaporate off, and then you can use it because there won't be any chlorine in it. And leave them to soak for 24 hours or 18 hours, and then strain out the water, leave them on their side, and rinse them twice a day until they're sprouted to the length you want. And you must rinse them thoroughly, because actually what you've taken away from the natural system is the soil, and the soil would have taken away the byproducts of sprouting, which will make your seeds go slimy if they're left there, which is why you need to rinse them well, because you haven't got the soil. I get really excited watching sprouting, and I really love it if you can grow it on so that you get little green sprouts as well, because you also get then the chlorophyll, which is very beneficial. So anything that you can play around with and get a system going, even if you only do a couple of things, maybe you decide to do just mung beans every week, it will really add different set of minerals, vitamins and phytonutrients into your diet.
Well, shifting gears slightly, can we go on to the topic of food waste? We know it's a big problem, but could you tell us how big a problem it actually is and what we could do to try and avoid it?
Ooh, it's a huge, huge problem. Well, in the UK, RAP research shows in 2022, we threw away 6.4 million tonnes of household food and drink, of which 4.7 million tonnes was edible.
Gosh.
So binning food is a huge waste of the precious materials and the effort it took to bring that food into your kitchen. It wastes soil, it wastes water, it wastes nutrients, it wastes resources, it wastes packaging, transport. So we really, really have to think of ways of minimizing that waste.
Could you give us any top tips or recipes that you use to minimize food waste?
Well, I've just been writing a brochure on it, seeing you talk about it. Well, I mean, I think there's lots of different things that you can think about. People always say, meal plan, write shopping lists so you don't overbuy. But I don't think it helps to get too obsessive about that. I think it's important to have a few ideas up your sleeve of what you can do with leftovers. So, for example, leftover dal, I would turn that into a flatbread for the next evening's meal. So actually you take your leftover dal and you work some spelt flour into it until you've got a dough, roll it out, pan fry it, and you've got a flatbread. So, and if you've got leftover vegetables, you could very easily, leftover roast vegetables, chop them up and make a very tasty bruschetta with them. It's actually thinking of ways of using them rather than binning them. And the last resort would be for me was to put them into my compost.
Brilliant. And I just want to ask you about composting in a minute, but Claire, have you got any good food waste tips that you do in your kitchen?
Well, I worry about how much I've contributed through my sprouting and fermentation efforts gone wrong.
There's no recovery from that one, I guess.
No.
Well, I guess if they're going into a compost and feeding the worms, it's okay, isn't it?
True. And so is composting enough to balance the soil in our gardens and the nutrients in the garden soil?
Well, possibly. Everyone's soil is going to be different, but ultimately feed the soil and the soil will feed the plants. Adding your own compost is a fantastic thing. I also add the odd bit of seaweed that I make compost liquid and a little bit of nettle liquid. I just look after the garden with whatever I've got, really. You can go as far as getting your soil tested if you want to know it, but you can tell your soil is actually harmonizing with the plants by the glow and vitality of the plants you grow. If the plants aren't happy, then you need to address something that's happening in the soil.
Thinking not just about soil, but thinking about all the things we've talked about there, and the fact that unfortunately there's often this overlap between people being short on money and short on time. Have you got any tips about what would be the main thing somebody could do to improve their diet in all these ways, local, organic, how could you go about giving somebody just, the three top things to do that would bring them the most benefit?
Possibly choose a prep day, whatever day of the week you've got, that you can dedicate 3 or 4 hours to cooking. I cook up a bowl of rice, a pan of rice, for example, and I store it in the fridge, and it's fine for up to 3 days. And that means I've got an instant meal in the fridge that if I'm short of time, I can quickly reheat some rice and put something on top of it. And I've got a bowl. I'm really keen on bowl food, actually. Make a batch of soup that can be stored in the fridge, and batch cook anything else with the end of last week's vegetable buy and store it in the deep freeze. I would always set aside some time, unless you're somebody who has actually got 2 hours or 1 hour every evening. It's a good way of ensuring that you're always going to have something nutritious at hand. I think fermenting and sprouting is really good, because then you've always got something really tasty just to put on top of something like a bowl of rice. I'm going to go way beyond 3 here. I think eating seasonally is always going to be better on your purse. Keeping essentials well stocked. I think actually having tinned tomatoes, if you live by yourself, I think it's much better to have tinned beans than having dried beans and soaking them. It's far more economical on energy. If you've got a slow cooker, I would use that. Put something in the slow cooker in the morning and it's ready when you get home in the evening.
I do know people who successfully batch cook. Our problem is that we tend to overeat when we batch cook. If I try and make something that's going to give me 4 or 6 portions, we tend to go back for seconds, but that might just be our own our own issue. Yeah.
Well, I would batch cook and freeze or divide it into smaller portions, so you only heat up and use the number of portions that you need that night, and don't thaw the other ones.
Yeah, this is, to sort of take it out of play. That's what I need to do. So that takes us nicely on to, you said you had, you were going to go way beyond, you've got way more tips. And of course, what the trust does, the Greencuisine Trust,
Oh, yes.
The purpose then is to make this sort of food knowledge more widely available. So can you tell us about how you're delivering that in the trust?
I run 2 programs now. I mean, I used to run an awful lot of programs, but I decided I would limit it to 2. And the one is Return of the Larder, and that is encouraging people to preserve food. It needn't be food that they've grown themselves. It could be any glut of seasonal food, any food that they've foraged, or actually food that they've gleaned. I love the gleaners. The gleaners are a group that go out and take the leftover vegetables and crops from farmers after they've harvested the field. And the farmers are linked into this system. You don't just randomly choose a field. So you've got an abundance. And so what I like to do is work with people at how they're going to save them. So I do the fermenting, I do the drying, I do tonics, I do tinctures, and lots of ways of preserving food. So it seems it went out of fashion having a larder. I want to bring the larder back so that we have a well-stocked food for whatever emergency hits us next.
Oh, I love that word. I've not heard the word to glean before.
Gleaners are great.
Not in that context.
Yeah.
I hope you're going to be teaching us more about this, because I wanted to ask you specifically about the course that you're going to be running for healthcare professionals.
So that's my second big project this year, which is Whole Food Medicine, which is an evidence-based, CPD-accredited, hands-on farm and nutrition workshop. And it's really, really important for me to have hands-on, because I think engaging the senses to really fall in love with your food, the textures, the tastes, the sounds and the sights in the garden and the kitchen, I think are really, really important if you want to encourage people to eat well. And then with it goes a whole series of pamphlets that I'm halfway through that are going to be available for medical professionals to give out to their patients. so that we can really embed these ideas into more people.
Absolutely, because I think we say it all the time. We know the evidence is, if you're not enthused by something as a healthcare professional yourself, you're much less likely to talk to your patients about it. And even if you did, you wouldn't be authentic. And we had that message on one of our other podcasts, was a guest telling us most important thing when you're giving a message is to feel that you can be authentic with it. So it's obviously important for you to use the healthcare professionals. When did you come along with the idea to actually really target them as a group?
I think it's because I feel they can have such an influence on people's health. And although I've worked extensively with individuals, I think some of this information is so important that it needs to be in the hands of people like teachers and medics who can influence the most number of people. And I'm really aware also that as a group, health professionals are short of time, and anything that I can do that helps them pass this information on with all the work that I'm preparing at the moment, I think is really important. How many people know about because we talked about organic, but sharing the certification which is in place for stock-free organic. So these are farms that use nothing on the farm of animal origin. And it's a fantastic certification. And the master of this is Ian Tolhurst. And he has grown just outside Reading unbelievably beautiful vegetables with no animal additions at all. And it is a certification now, stock-free organic. But there's got to be about 200,000 farms in this country. And at the moment, there's only 20 stock-free organic farms.
Wow. I think that'll be really interesting for our listeners to hear. So the chances of you actually being able to get all your food stock-free organic is quite slim, is what you're saying.
It is quite slim. But the beauty is knowing it can be done. These are examples of flourishing farms that haven't got any input of any manure or anything like that. And I just think it's important to be able to show people best examples.
Yeah, absolutely.
Daphne, most of our listeners will be healthcare professionals. Can you tell us again a bit about the courses that you're offering? When is that? I think we're going, aren't we, Claire? Are we going on to Daphne's course?
We are. We haven't paid yet, Daisy, but we just got to. I think there's a box popping up on the internet for that.
Can you tell us about the course, Daphne, and how people can access?
I can tell you about the course. So it is connecting to the garden where the vegetables are being grown. It is harvesting them and bringing them into the kitchen and preparing them. But it's also a lot of conversations. So it's a conversation around soil and how natural farming practices look after the soil and produce the most nutritious foods. It's about whole foods, which I know is what you talk about, but it's about understanding the importance of the bioactive compounds that are part of the matrix of a whole food. And actually, when we disrupt that matrix, we have lost the synergy of how they all work together. And actually, that is a complexity that we haven't fully uncovered. But we do know that foods with the entire matrix are going to be better for you. It's talking about food as information and how the food we eat sends messages to our body. There's a lot that I go into around that. And also around nutritionism, because it's fine to put nutrition up on a pedestal in one way, but in another way, it detracts from the other things that are really, really important about how you make the most of your food by sharing it with people, by working together in gardens, by harvesting together. These are other elements that actually enable food to come into our being and nourish us best. And I'll also talk an awful lot about smart ways of cooking, so saving energy in food preparation, how to avoid ultra-processed foods, I mean, if you think 68% of the food that we now eat is ultra processed, we need to think of some strategies to move ourselves away from that. I talk about avoiding waste and different ways to access nutritious food.
Brilliant. I'm looking forward to that. I've learnt so much today, but I feel like this course is going to be, just going to take it to a whole nother level. So thanks, Daphne. And we'll put the link in the show notes for people that want to join us. It's later on in the summer, is that right? In the UK?
There's going to be one a month starting in May.
Oh, nice.
One a month. And I long-term may run them in different places, but at the moment it's on Hayman's Farm, which is a biodynamic farm just outside Billingshurst.
Brilliant. Fantastic. That's really good. And so on that note, to leave our listeners with some further inspiration, we normally like asking our guests about what they're having for dinner, but can you inspire us with perhaps a vegetable, a seasonal vegetable that you like to eat or that you're going to incorporate into your meal tonight?
Well, my favourite food at this time of year is nettles. Can I use nettles as an example?
Of course,
definitely.
Yeah. Nettles. And they're all popping through. Everyone laughs when they come here because I actually grow a nettle bed, chop them down and harvest them 3 times a year. So nettles, due to their rich iron content, are traditionally used to treat anemia. They're also used to rejuvenate you after the winter's rest. And they are nature's antihistamine. So they've been used forever to block the body's ability to make histamine. And it's this time of year when we start getting some of the allergies. So I think nettles are very good to incorporate. I mean, it's really, really interesting, isn't it? I mean, do you know how many edible plant species there are?
I don't know. I'm sure that Rahini at PBHP has told us this, and it's something like 30,000.
I was going to say it's going to be loads, isn't it? I don't want to hazard a guess because I'll be way off.
200,000 edible plant species. And globally, routinely, we eat 200. And 3 crops, which are maize, rice and wheat, account for half of the calories and proteins we derive from plants. So we have lost that amazing diversity. It is important because we don't really know enough around phytonutrients, these amazing compounds that are in plants, which actually mostly act as antioxidants, but support our bodies in so many different ways. And the more plant species we eat, the more potential we have to take on a diverse range of phytonutrients. I love using something like a nettle, which is growing wild and it's saying, hi, here I am, pick me. But there's so many other plants that we can use at this time of year, like sort of chickweed or cleavers and hawthorns coming out. And I think we need to make the most of those. And if you grow food, I think you ought to grow a variety of salad leaves. Do you know, there's this amazing guy, Stephen Barstow, who lives in Norway now, but he was brought up in this country. And he set the record for the greatest number of plant varieties in a salad. There's 363 distinct plant varieties in his salad.
That is incredible.
And it's that we need to bring back those varieties. And that's the other thing about local growers. Local growers are far more likely to have a diverse range of crops, especially the salad crops, which is only good for us. I think actually today I'm just going to make a nettle soup.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. So are these the same nettles? Because for me, nettles is just a reminder of my childhood and getting my ankles stung or whatever, yes. Running around the fields.
Yes.
So is this the same? We're talking the same thing here?
We are talking about the same thing.
Wow. Okay.
Just wear gloves when you harvest them. I quite like the idea that they sting you because I think it's like the nettle saying, respect me.
Yeah.
You just respect me. I'm going to give you a lot of nourishment. So yes, they are stinging nettles, and they sting a lot when they're young as well.
Okay, so you have to obviously pick them cautiously, and then you just cook them in a soup. Did you say?
Yeah, I'm going to cook them in a soup. But the expression "grasp the nettle."
Yeah,
that's where we go wrong. We're so tentative it's going to sting us that we do it tenderly. But actually, if you grasp them, they don't sting you.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Wow.
Off you go, Daisy. So
try to put those childhood memories in the background.
Get over that. But the thing to do with any green leaf when you make a soup is to blanch it. So actually put your green leaf, in this case nettles, into boiling water for 30 seconds, strain, keep the water because that is a really nutritious tea, and then quickly rinse in cold water, and that sets the chlorophyll. If you don't do that, if you just boil it in the body of your soup, you lose the chlorophyll.
Okay, understood. And then I've read somewhere you can just add them like you would, say, I don't know, spinach or kale or something like that to a curry or to a pasta dish. Or
Totally. Anything that you
Nice.
can use, chard or spinach, you can use nettle. Yeah, I'm very keen on nettle. And the other thing, of course, that's coming in now is wild garlic. And you can find people selling bunches of that down farmers markets if you don't have your own secret supply.
I have a secret supply.
Do you?
I definitely have a secret supply. I'm just saying, because actually we were thinking in developing the podcast, we were saying we're moving away from what you're having for dinner, and the idea would be that you would talk about what you do with nettles, Daisy would talk about what she'd do with nettles, I would talk about what I'd do with nettles, and I was sort of like, oh, I've never cooked nettles, but Daisy just snuck in there about putting them in a curry. So you have eaten them before?
No, because I remember we talked about this and I thought, I don't know what to do with nettles. So I've just quickly Googled it. And apparently you can put them in a curry. So I'll try that. What are you going to do with your nettles, Claire?
I don't know. But this is the thing. You're going to have to get rid of that punnet of strawberries, aren't you? And bring your nettles in there, some fridge space.
But nettles are so easy to dry. So just pick up a big bunch, tie it up with string and dry it. Once the leaves are dry, blitz them into a powder, and you have got an amazingly mineral-rich powder to add to things. So I used to put it in breads. Nobody ever knew it was in there. You wouldn't know it was in there. I make all my own powders that can add benefits to whatever you're making.
That's fascinating, considering how much people spend on green powders and things like that.
This is all free,
Much
isn't it?
easier to make your own.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, that has been very enlightening, Daphne, I must say. I feel like I've learned so much today. I'm going to have to go back and listen to all your tips again and make some notes and things. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We really enjoyed chatting with you.
Oh, thank you. Really nice to be on it.
Thank you so much. And I am super looking forward to coming to the course. And I think we're coming in July. But maybe some of our listeners will have already come to see you in May and June, which would be fantastic as well.
Yeah, so we'll pop all those links in the show notes. And just wanted to say thank you again. Yeah.
And the nettle recipes, they're going as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I sent you those, didn't I?
Yeah. Just got to get my nettles.
Get people started, won't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We just need to get started. That's it.
And if they absolutely can't get nettles, then you can use any green leaf.
Yeah.
I live in the country and they're everywhere. But if someone is really stuck for getting nettles, you could put some other green leaf in instead to all those recipes.
Still use the recipe. Great. Thank you so much.
All right. Good to talk to you.